Hi everyone, this is Dr. Garcia. I'm sorry I had to be out today. I'm not feeling well, but I'd like to share with you some information about the weather. Many of you were asking about sometimes, like, how do who, excuse me, how is the weather? How does the weather change? This is a name named meteorology, and I'd like to show you a video about that, and then we'll talk more about it when I get back to you in class.
What do you know about the weather? Suppose you want to plan a swim party. How will you know if it's going to be a good day for swimming? The weather might be perfect right now, but what about later today? Or tomorrow? Or next week?
That's easy. We can check the weather report.
That's true. But did you ever stop to think how the weather report is able to tell you so much about the weather?
I guess the people who put the weather report together must really do their homework. They probably study the weather.
That's exactly what they do.
But how do they do it?
Sounds like a good question for our kid weather watchers around the world. Learning about the weather is just like learning about anything else. You have to investigate. Are you ready? Okay then, let's go. When you think of weather, what comes to mind?
Rain, snow, wind, sunshine, thunder and lightning.
Right. All of these are part of the weather. And if we break it down to its simplest ingredients, air plus sunshine plus water equals weather. It works like this. The sun heats up the earth, and the warm earth heats up both the air and water. Some of that water turns into a gas and becomes part of the air. From there, anything can happen. Any kind of weather, that is. It really depends on how much water is in the air and how much the sun heats up the earth.
And that's what the people who make their weather report study?
Yes, but there's a lot more to it than that. And that's what we're going to investigate. The study of weather is called meteorology. And the scientists who do this studying are called meteorologists. Predicting what the weather will be in the future is a science. It's not too hard to tell what the weather will be like in 5 minutes, or even an hour from now. Just look around. It'll usually be pretty much the same as it is right now. But try predicting the weather tomorrow, or the next day, or even next week. That's a different story. If you drop a stick in a stream, can you tell exactly where it will go? It's not too tough to guess where it will go right after you drop it. You can see which way the water is flowing and what rocks it might bump into along the way. But as the stick floats further downstream, it's much harder to tell exactly where it will go. The current might change, or there might be something blocking the way. To know for sure, you'd have to study the stream up and down and drop the stick over and over, noting where it goes each time. The same is true of forecasting the weather. Meteorologists don't just guess. They study the patterns of the air and the temperature over long periods of time. And they look at storms happening in other parts of the world, so they can help us to know what weather we can expect in the future. Meteorologists also teach, do research, and study the quality of our air. Since meteorologists study the weather, they spend a lot of time studying the atmosphere, the blanket of air that surrounds our planet.
That makes sense. After all, air is a big part of the weather.
Right. If it weren't for the Earth's atmosphere, there wouldn't be any weather. Or any of us, for that matter. We couldn't survive without the atmosphere. It gives us air to breathe and helps keep heat near the surface of the planet. Meteorologists use special tools to measure things in our atmosphere that can give clues about the weather.
So what kinds of things can weather watchers like us measure?
Well, for one thing, you can measure the temperature of the air.
For that, I bet we could use a thermometer.
That's right. A thermometer is a simple but very important weather tool. Knowing the temperature outside lets us know whether it's warm enough for a pool party or cold enough to play in the snow. So even though we can't see it, all air is stuff. It's made of tiny particles of gases like oxygen and nitrogen. That's why we can feel the wind blow. Some of those particles are water vapor, moisture in the air. How much moisture is in the air is called humidity. The more water vapor or moisture there is in the air, the higher the humidity and the stickier you feel. When humidity is low, you feel drier and more comfortable. Moisture in the air is what forms clouds and can eventually turn into rain or snow. So it's important to keep track of the humidity. To do that, meteorologists use a hygrometer, a device that tells them how much moisture is in the air. Did you ever have a bad hair day? Well, it may have been caused by humidity. Human hair is very sensitive to moisture in the air. That's why some hygrometers use a single strand of human hair to measure humidity. Besides hair, another natural humidity gauge is a pine cone. In dry weather, pine cones open up. But in damp weather, the scales swell up and close.
I understand that there is moisture in the air, but what I want to know is this. How does moisture get into the air in the first place?
It works like this. The sun's warmth can cause water in oceans, lakes, and streams to heat up and change into water vapor. This process is called evaporation. The water vapor becomes part of the air. The warmer the air, the more water vapor it tends to have in it. As moist air rises into the sky, it begins to cool off. As it cools, the water vapor changes back into liquid water. That's called condensation. You know condensation, like the water on the bathroom mirror after a steamy shower or bath.
Hey, that's sort of the opposite of evaporation.
Exactly. That water in the air is what creates clouds. Eventually, the water in clouds can fall back to Earth as
Rain, snow, or ice.
you got it. That's called precipitation. This process of water evaporating into the air, forming clouds, and falling back to the Earth is happening all the time around the world. It never ends. It's called the water cycle and is one of the most important things that meteorologists study.
I'd say that's worth studying.
On to the next important thing meteorologists study about the atmosphere: air pressure. Pressure is the weight of air.
Hold on. Air has weight?
It sure does. Remember, air is made of tiny particles. Even though those particles are too small to see, they do have weight.
And since the atmosphere is all around the whole world, that must mean that every place has air pressure.
That's true. But it's important to know that air pressure can be very different in different places. Remember, air pressure is the weight of the atmosphere pressing on us. There is lower air pressure on the top of a mountain than there is on a place down low near the ocean. The more atmosphere above a place, the more air pressing down. So the more air pressure.
Okay, now for the big question. Why do meteorologists need to measure air pressure?
Differences in air pressure are what make air move. Meteorologists know that air tends to move away from areas of high pressure toward areas of low pressure. That moving air, is what we call wind. Here's a way to see how air pressure works to create wind. First, blow up a balloon and hold the end shut so the air can't escape. You've now increased the air pressure inside the balloon compared to the air around the outside.
So, inside the balloon, high pressure. Got it.
What do you think will happen when you open your fingers? The air rushes from the area of high pressure inside the balloon to the area of low pressure outside the balloon. And the result is wind.
So, knowing the air pressure can help meteorologists know which way the winds will blow.
Yes, and since winds are what move clouds from place to place, it also helps them know what type of weather is headed your way.
How do meteorologists measure air pressure?
With a tool called a barometer. Meteorologists use a barometer to look for changes in air pressure, because that can mean changes in the weather. When air pressure is increasing, meteorologists say the barometer is rising. That usually means fair weather. But when the air pressure is getting lower, the barometer is falling, which can mean rain, snow, or other stormy weather. Meteorologists need to measure temperature, pressure, and humidity, not only here on the ground, but also high up in the atmosphere, where winds are always blowing and a lot of weather happens. To do that, they use weather balloons to carry thermometers, hygrometers, barometers, and other instruments high into the atmosphere. This information can help weather forecasters know what's coming their way. Changes in conditions high in the sky can mean changes are coming down on the ground, too. Wind is what blows the clouds from place to place all around the world.
And we know clouds can make rain.
When rain and clouds move out and make way for a sunny day, we have wind to thank.
So, wind is a good thing. But what about when it's sunny? And then a storm moves in?
Well, that's wind too. In fact, there are all kinds of winds, from gentle breezes to strong storm winds, even hurricane force winds.
Whoa, that looks like too much of a good thing. How do meteorologists measure the wind?
There are two important things we need to know about the wind: which direction it's blowing from and how fast it's blowing. Meteorologists use a weather vane or windsock to tell the direction wind is blowing. This weather vane is pointing west. That means the wind is blowing from the west. So it's a west wind. To measure wind speed, meteorologists use a device called an anemometer. Wind direction and speed can be clues about where air masses will move and how soon they'll get there. Let's do a quick check on what we've learned about meteorology so far.
We know that meteorology is the science of the weather.
Check.
And that the people who study the weather are called meteorologists.
Check.
They use special equipment to measure things in the atmosphere, to look for patterns in the weather.
Check.
Like a thermometer to measure temperature, a barometer to measure air pressure, and a hygrometer to measure humidity, or a weather vane to find out wind direction, and an anemometer to measure its speed. With all of these instruments, meteorologists are able to get a better idea of which way air and storms are moving.
Whew! You kids really have this meteorology stuff down cold.
Okay, so this video showed us so much about the different elements of meteorology and how we can measure the weather. What I'd like you to do next is complete an activity posted on your Google Classroom.